Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to our session. So we are going to discuss riparian rangers, our program for monitoring and helping maintain riparian forest buffers. All right, next slide, Rebecca. Okay, so real quick, who are we? And this is pretty pertinent to kind of this program, how it runs and why it exists in the first place. So we're the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. This is actually our 50th year. We've been around kind of since that first sort of environmental movement, Clean Water Act, resulting movement in the 1970s. But we have four sort of pillars of our work: agriculture, forests, green infrastructure, stewardship, and engagement. And we cover the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, though we have 4 offices right now. Rebecca and I are based out of our Lancaster, PA office. But really what we are trying to do is bring together as many people as possible to improve the Chesapeake Bay in as many ways as we possibly can. Rebecca and I are both on our forest team, but this program we're going to talk about, in addition to being incredibly collaborative and kind of the way that it works, it serves the forest team and that stewardship and engagement team. We're helping achieve our goals to reforest as much of the watershed as possible, and we're achieving our goals to involve as many people in that process as we possibly can. So next slide, Rebecca. We'll go ahead and get into the meat. I'm sure everyone here is kind of is a watershed nerd just like us. You know what a riparian forest buffer is, but just in case, pretty important point to make. So riparian just means streamside, basically, in Latin. These are incredibly sensitive ecosystems that are really valuable in their own right, not just for water quality, but for wildlife too. They're really valuable habitats, really generally a reservoir of biological diversity on the landscape. They're really, really important. We need riparian forests, and we absolutely need riparian forests if we are to have clean water. Very hard to have clean water without a healthy riparian forest surrounding most of a stream system. And so when we talk about riparian forest buffers, what these are artificially planted riparian forests or planned for natural succession, but generally planted forests that we're planting for these goals for water quality, habitat restoration, etc. So there's a ton of organizations that are planting these riparian forest buffers all the time, from the USDA, the federal, all the way down to volunteers on the weekend, completely volunteer run organizations. And so we're all focused on this, not only because it's such a valuable thing to do for wildlife and for water quality in general, but in the numbers for meeting our TMDL, our total maximum daily load for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Riparian forest buffers are one of the top BMPs, best management practices, because they're very effective at reducing nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment in the water, but they're also cheap relative to that bang for the buck, if you will. So we're planting a ton, and then Rebecca, on to the next slide. However, there's always a problem, right? So yeah, super easy to plant trees. Anyone can plant trees. We plant trees all the time with kids, but establishing a forest is challenging. It's a lot more challenging. A lot can go wrong in those first couple of years if the proper maintenance is not followed. And so it's a pretty simple recipe, fortunately. Really, most of what we're doing is reducing vole herbivory. So we have to use those plastic tube shelters to keep deer off of the trees. There are so many deer in our region that if we don't, we'll lose pretty much every single tree to deer. When we put those shelters over it, we create a nice little shelter for the voles to stay inside. So they will actually seek out those shelters where they'll be safer, and then they will girdle the trees in peace inside of the little piece of plastic we gave them, and then move on to the next tree and keep going and going and going. However, if we reduce the vegetation so that there's no cover for the voles, they will stay in the patches where there is good vegetation and good cover, and they won't go out in the open where they could get picked off by a predator. So all we have to do, like you can see there on the right, we can even leave a decent amount of cover on a site. We just need to give a good bit of space to the trees with herbicide, generally once or twice a year, and then mowing in between the planted trees. All right, next slide, Rebecca. And usually if we don't have that proper maintenance, we get very, very, very low survival on a 10-year scale. Like I'm talking 1 or 2 trees to survive. So, that's great. And we talk about that a lot in our kind of, reforestation community of the maintenance, but we don't talk about the tending as much because this is a lot more time intensive. It's one thing to have a contractor come a couple years, do the mowing, do the spraying, but then another thing to just keep eyes and ears on the site to make sure cows are not getting in. For instance, this picture here on the right, and we'll talk about riparian rangers in a little bit, but a riparian ranger sent that to me on a Sunday. And when they went down to do their check, and so I immediately knew, okay, I got to call the farmer, I got to get things rolling, we got to fix that fence up. There's also a lot of ways those shelters can kill the trees if they're not tended to. Flooding damage can push the shelters over. We need somebody to straighten them back up. There could be a lot of vegetation in there. The tree can get tangled in the bird net, all sorts of things that are really not a big issue if these sites are being tended to, if someone is there to make sure the shelter is getting straightened back up. If we just leave them, the trees will eventually die. So this kind of tending, in addition to that kind of more, rigid maintenance of mowing and spraying, are absolutely part of the recipe for success to having a good establishment rate. Next slide. So our solution to this problem is the fact that we have a lot of people who want to help, right? There's a lot of people who really, really want to get involved. They just maybe don't know how. A lot of people increasingly are more aware of the need for more forest cover, mostly for climate change, for pollinators, things like that, but certainly for water quality too. And so all we have to do is kind of tap into this energy and enthusiasm, train them, and support them to help us out. So that is what Riparian Rangers is all about. So I started off in spring 2019 for the Alliance here, and I will say it's based off of a couple similar models that other organizations have come up with over the years. The first time I heard someone taking this approach was Clearwater Conservancy back, it was probably 2015 or 2016 maybe, when I heard about it at a conference. And then some other partners have a pretty robust, Stroudwater Research Center has a really robust intern monitoring program. And so kind of took these little pieces of stuff other awesome organizations have done and applied it here. And so a lot of it was because we started this riparian forest buffer program in 2018, we got a lot of plantings in, and 2018 was a very flood prone year. Every site just kept getting wiped out by floods. And so I kind of realized very quickly, if we continue to plant as much as I'm hoping we will, we are not going to be able to, keep monitoring everything as much as we need to. So we started training folks. We had no resources. We kind of still don't have a ton, and we kind of made it up as we went along. But we trained a group of people who, most of those folks there pictured on the right are still Riparian Rangers for us a couple of years later. All right, next slide. And so then, kind of the history of it, we really had to pause things in 2020 because of COVID. Early days, no one knew what was safe and all that kind of stuff. But our Riparian Rangers, that first kind of class of folks we trained, kept it up without really any, help. They just kept out there, and it was a good way for them to kind of make a change for the world, get some exercise, get outside, like we kind of all sort of needed at that point. And then, next slide, we were finally, things got a little safer, sort of late 2020, we were able to kind of start training a bunch of new volunteers. Also, sort of late 2020 in August, Rebecca joined our team, originally as a Chesapeake Conservation Corps member. And with that extra capacity and extra, fantastic work ethic, we were able to grow immensely. And we're kind of now in this stage of really being able to, now that we have someone who's focusing on it and who's also awesome, we're able to really grow it and make it an even better program. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it right off to Rebecca.
All right, thanks for that intro, Ryan. I'm going to take over now and talk about kind of our day-to-day structure and sort of what we ask of Riparian Rangers. So sort of to orient you to the format of the program, we have sort of our trunk, which is the Alliance, and our directly trained Riparian Rangers. So we train them one-on-one or with group trainings when we're able to do that safely, more so soon. And they take care of mostly Alliance planted sites. We're trying to expand to take care of some partner sites as well, but they're mostly taking care of our sites that we've directly planted. And a lot of these volunteers come from local organizations, different stewardship groups, or people that sign up at Alliance events that just hear about the program and want to be involved. And so far, those directly trained Riparian Rangers are kind of anywhere that the Alliance is planting sites. So sort of South Central, Southeastern PA general area. And we are also working to expand sort of this trunk structure into a new tree, I guess, with our Maryland office. We're sort of in the beginning stages of that, but hopefully we'll be able to replicate this there as well. And then the other portion of our program is these branches that we've started to develop. So these are regionally based volunteer groups. We so far have one in Juniata County and York County, and they are run by branch leaders there that kind of are able to train those Riparian Rangers in a local area and coordinate them sort of outside of an area that their Alliance would normally be able to reach. And they take care of non-Alliance planted sites. So this is sort of a way that we can expand to partners and support them and have them also maintaining their sites properly. And hopefully these rangers will also be able to take care of Alliance sites when needed, but kind of the goal is that community partners in expanded areas have their own set of volunteers that can do this maintenance. And so the Alliance helps to train those branch leaders and riparian rangers, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But then the Alliance also coordinates a reporting form that comes from the riparian rangers in that area back to the branch leader. So that's kind of the overall branch structure. And sort of where those are located, like I said, we have one in Juniata County, which was started in June of 2021. And that's with the Juniata County Conservation District and a watershed alliance that is there, run by Mindy Musser. And then our second branch was started a month later in York County, and also with the Conservation District there, and run by the watershed technician at the Conservation District, Alyssa Schwartz. And so I put that map in on the right to kind of show where that geographic spread is. As you can see, Juniata County is pretty far away. So the fact that we have a branch there allows us to sort of like expand where we're coordinating volunteers at. And York is pretty close to our office, which is that gold star there. But it still helps immensely that we have someone coordinating volunteers there locally. So that's where those are. And so kind of overall status of our program, we have about 90 total members. 60 of those are kind of those internal trunk members, I guess we could call them, that are directly Alliance trained. And then we had 32 new people trained in 2021. So like Ryan said, we're really able to expand that program recently. And then of course, all of our branch members are new this year. So we have about 26 of them as well, about 6 at the Juniata branch and then about 20 at York County branch. And overall, they're taking care of about 68 different sites, and 57 of those are kind of our Alliance planted sites, internally maintained, and then 11 sites are taken care of by our branch members. So what we ask of riparian rangers, we ask that if they're able to visit the site monthly over the growing season, so from March to October. If they're not able to go out every month, that's okay, but that's kind of the ideal, is that they're there each month to do tending tasks, that sort of thing. And we also ask that they stay in regular communication with either the Alliance or their branch leader, just so that we know that they're taking care of the site, and just, yeah, that they're active, and if they need anything from us or if we need to follow up with anything. So that's really important that they stay in communication with us. And so when they're on site, we ask that they kind of do those TLC tasks, like on each individual tree shelter. So straightening stakes as needed, fixing tree shelters if they are impeding the tree's growth or anything like that, removing bird nets when they need to come off, removing competing weeds or plants inside of the shelters, and monitoring invasive species if there seems to be like an overabundance or anything like that. We ask that they report that. And then, of course, this reporting form, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we actually ask that they fill that out after each visit. And then if possible, it's kind of bonus, if depending on how willing they are to invest time, that sort of thing, we ask that they check up on the site after flood events. So again, that's kind of a spontaneous thing. So if they're not able to do that, either an Alliance staff member will go and check on the site. But ideally, they are able to go out and check on their site if there's been heavy rain. And they also help with replanting. We replant our sites for the first 3 years after the initial planting. So if some of the riparian rangers are comfortable just leading that planting themselves, or they're just able to help alongside Alliance staff. And then as they're able, they also remove invasive species. Sometimes that can be challenging, so we don't ask them to remove everything, but if they feel comfortable with doing that, they're also able to do that as well. So then the individual training process, this is kind of like our one-on-one training structure, mostly with our trunk riparian rangers. So we'll meet them on site. I'll send them a map ahead of time and our planting plan, so they are familiar with what the site looks like and where to go. And then we just kind of walk through the buffer and do all those maintenance tasks that I just talked about together, so they can see what it looks like and ask questions in the moment if anything comes up. If they have any questions about how to do something, they can just ask right then. And then at the end of the training, we give them a packet, like a resource that goes over what they're supposed to do. It has the landowner contact information, and some invasive plant ID information. We give them extra supplies that they can use to fix the buffer when needed. And then we also give them a link to this online reporting form to talk about here. And this reporting form is pretty much just to let us know like if the overall maintenance is happening or if there's like any big issues that need to be addressed. So if the mowing and herbicide rings are present, they let us know if it's not, and if it's at the point in the season when that should be done, then we know we should like follow up with our contractor. They can also let us know the number of dead trees from when we replant in the fall. And then if there's any sort of animal damage, like Ryan said, that Riparian Ranger let us know about the cattle getting in the buffer, so things like that. And then if they have any other questions or comments or photos that they want to share, they're able to do that. And so up in the right there is what the form kind of looks like. We just use a Google form, and we're also able to download data from that and like make like a chart like this one here that kind of shows how the sites were looking at the point that that data was collected. So then shifting to how we do our branch training, rather than meeting on the site that Riparian Ranger is working on, we'll just meet on a site that is kind of a good demonstration site. And there we introduce the branch leader and kind of talk through the overall program structure and all that kind of thing. And again, we'll walk through the buffer and do maintenance and kind of show examples so people can get firsthand experience while there's like a trainer there with them. And then if we have time, since it's generally with a bigger group, we'll do some invasive ID and native plant ID, more of like a Q&A kind of group discussion as time allows. And then they get the same resources that are like directly trained trunk riparian rangers get. So they get that packet and then extra supplies and also access to a reporting form, but one that is specific to their branch so that we can communicate directly with the branch leader about those sites that they're in charge of. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight some of the ways that this has already been really helpful for us. Kind of we already talked about, but if cattle are getting into the buffer, our riparian rangers are able to let us know that ahead of time, or let us know that before too much time goes by. So we're able to address that pretty quickly. And we've had a couple of big flood events recently that our riparian rangers have been out to check on their buffers and fix things up. This is from one site that got hit pretty hard, but our riparian ranger has been out there multiple times fixing things. And that just is a huge help to us because then we don't have to go out to every single site that we have. So that's really helpful. And then also removing tree shelters. That's another way. As our plantings age, those shelters have to come off periodically. So if we have someone that's checking up on the site every now and then, that's a lot easier than us like having to go out really regularly to remove those shelters as the trees get to the right size. And then just some overall lines highlights to kind of see where this fits into our overall program. As of October 1st, we're going to be adding more this fall and spring. We have 112 sites. And so 55 of those are taken care of by riparian rangers. So like about half of our sites are sites that we are getting regular communication about and that we don't have to go out to regularly. So that's super helpful. The rest are either taken care of by line staff, or a lot of them are taken care of by the landowner themselves. And we also have a range of site types that those riparian rangers are taking care of. A little over 40% are farms. So it's really helpful to have rangers there on sites where the landowner is generally busy and doesn't have time to do more of that maintenance. So it's really important to have them there. And then about a fourth are residential, and then 15-ish% are parks, and then the rest is either like community or public land. And then just some photos to kind of show the range of what our different sites can look like. So I'm going to hand it back to Ryan now to talk about where things are going.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so kind of like Rebecca said earlier, we really wanted to not just kind of, help ourselves and then be able to offer this other, opportunity for volunteers, but the whole time we kind of saw, wow, everyone needs riparian rangers, right? Like it's so helpful for us. And as other organizations are kind of trying to get their own riparian forest buffer kind of programs on board, wouldn't it be nice if they had some support? So luckily, we've been able to start this, pilot some of these branches to support other folks, and it's been really, really great. So our goal now, in the kind of the shorter term, is to keep growing our branches. Part of that, what will determine the future here is how much funding we can pull in, because, like I said earlier, we kind of we really funded this through the staff component of our grants that allowed us to plant the buffers in the first place, because we build in some planning and monitoring kind of a budget in there. But now that we have all these sites, we kind of don't have the funds left in the grants to do that. So we have to get outside funds, which we feel it makes sense because we're bringing so much more, to the table with all this engagement too. So that's kind of a big part of what we're doing, is try to get more funding so that we can provide more support to other partners. And on that note, now that we have kind of a little bit more capacity, but especially once we get even more capacity, we want to be able to engage people even closer. We've seen a dramatic improvement in the program and retention, in the kind of the progress that our volunteers are able to make by just being able to support them more with Rebecca's time, for being able to check in with them, make sure they have everything they need, that kind of thing. And we want to be able to increase that engagement, make it more fun, have cookouts once a year or multiple times a year, do kind of more periodical trainings to do tree ID, that kind of stuff, newsletters. So this is somewhat in the hopeful near future for us for the program. You can go to the next slide. And so, yeah, again, we really need more grant funding if we're able to pull this off. But one of the things we wanted, because, a lot of y'all are in similar situations as us here. You work for agencies and organizations. I will say, as much as we're to the point where we need more funding so that we can keep, growing the program, not only does it help us with the implementation, but the match that all of the work that our volunteers are doing for us and with us is a huge amount of match that we can generate through this. So it's not too much of a burden for us to put on for us to run this program. It really is, it's super mutually beneficial. And so, yeah, so far we've been really bare bones with it. But that's all we need. It's just more staff time for Rebecca or whoever else, would be doing the coordination to do the good work, and a lot of travel budget, because we have to zip around pretty far to do all these trainings. And all these resources, again, we've noticed the more resources we're able to offer to our volunteers, the more they're able to get done with us. So having a little bit of budget space for that someday will be nice too. So we're working on that. Maybe in the future we'll report on how successful that effort has been. Next slide. So yeah, big picture, we need a lot more help, right? We need a lot more resources. If we're going to meet these goals, we're not going to be able to do it just as organizations. We kind of need to get more of the public involved, more of the public aware, and kind of simultaneously, there's a lot of people in the public who have a little bit of awareness, want to get involved and don't know how. And we feel that this is a really good way to do that. When I kind of first sort of cobbled it together, my thought was that if I didn't have this job, if I wasn't out here growing forests professionally and just kind of had some sort of office job or whatever, I would probably want to do this on my weekends, get out there, get dirty, help trees grow. And so yeah, it's been great that we're able to provide that to people and kind of fill that hole in people's hearts, if you will, while also helping contribute to these bigger picture goals across the landscape. And so yeah, but again, our partners need the support too. So hopefully we will get there. All right, next slide. So yeah, again, and I wanted one more point here on this. So this has been a really effective model for us, helping take care of our riparian forest buffers that are, pretty time intensive, labor intensive to keep eyes on. But this model can be replicated and kind of, this model has already been done, in other ways in green infrastructure for, say, rain garden maintenance, for street tree watering, for all sorts of things. Pretty much everything we touch that volunteer capacity could be helpful. Something similar to riparian rangers could absolutely be a component of it. And so, the stuff that we find most successful is, really kind of training people, really kind of matching people to a site that makes sense for them. And, all that follow up. But, all of these things that work really well for riparian rangers can be kind of exported to other areas. And we certainly encourage everyone to do that. And are happy to help if anyone is interested in doing that and wants to talk to us about it. But yeah, next slide. I think that's it. Thanks.